Welcome to the Centurion Response podcast, where we speak with faithful business leaders about their experiences following Jesus at work, at home, and in their communities. Hi, today I'm talking with Bill McKendry. Bill is the founder and chief creative officer of Brandhaven. He wrote a book and has created really a movement around something called Do More Good. And he and I go back 25 years this year. Bill, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, we were 5 when we met, right?
That's
so,
right. The percentage of age at 25 years might be different between us, but not.
Yeah.
I'm not saying who it's a bigger chunk for. So the other claim to fame that you bring with you is you played a central role in creating the He Gets Us campaign.
Yeah.
That's not as much yours to talk about as a spokesman for the organization anymore. And so I don't want to ask you to do that. But if you would you give a rundown of what that campaign is? Because I think for a lot of people, that will be the quickest claim to fame. And tell me about it, what its purpose was, and then we'll move into some other topics from there.
Yeah, He Gets Us, I tell people I got a call on March 4th, 2021, in the middle of COVID, by some concerned donors, Christian donors around the country who have seen a decline in Christianity, both in practice and people attending church, and also just a general misperceptions about Christianity in the market as a whole, specifically in this country. And the problem statement that I was told at the beginning of the process by these donors, when I asked them, it's like, what is it that you want to do? What is the problem that you're trying to overcome? And I tell people, I've been in this business for 40 years and I've worked on all kinds of problem and opportunity statements that have been pretty big. I've worked with some pretty big clients. I still maintain that this one is the biggest one and the best one I've ever heard in terms of really being able to honestly ask yourself a really hard question in that problem statement. And that problem statement was given to me as, how did the world's greatest love story in Jesus become known as a hate group? And I remember as they were telling it to me, I was alone in my office because it was COVID. Everybody had to work from home, especially here in Michigan, where I'm located. And I'm writing things down on a whiteboard in our conference room as they're telling me this. And I remember saying to the donor that was on the other line, on the other end of the phone, I said, after I wrote that down, I said, can I sit down for a moment? And they said, well, you're on a cell phone. It's not a Zoom call, so we wouldn't know if you're sitting down or not, right? And I go, oh, yeah, that's right. But then I remember then expressing what an incredible problem statement, because it's true, it's honest, it's brutally honest, especially for a group of very faithful people who have spent a lot of time and a lot of money building up Christianity. To have to ask that question has to be hard, right? And then, but I looked at it too and said, not only was it hard for them, it was really sad for me to write that down on the whiteboard, because it's like, that's the state of Christianity, especially in our country. And it's like, what have we done to the brand of Jesus, right? I remember throughout this process, I've been kind of looking back at, that day and saying, what led up to that day? And I remember I found a tweet that I actually sent out in 2012 that said, that Jesus is the best known brand in the world. Should he be asking Christianity to get his trademark license back from them? Right? Should he revoke that trademark license? Yep. And so as I looked at this problem statement, it was something that was on my heart for a really long time. But then to hear a group of people who are willing to fund something and do something about it, be so honest and say that's the truth. I also, what really hurt too, is I've done a lot of Christian work and I've put out a lot of communications, and I had to ask myself, have I done anything in my career or personally that has contributed to this? And I have to say I have, right? Especially when I got exposed to the research of what has created the circumstances that we see in front of us. And, much of what was in front of us was a lot of self-inflicted wounds, quite honestly. And
So let's pause on that, because I remember when we first started doing stuff, it was related to Compass Arts,
Mhm.
and the language there was about the conversation in the public square,
Right.
and the clients were Christian clients with causes, and so there were voice of the martyr type organizations, there were pro-life, there were homeless mission, there were a bunch of things that um, boy, lots of good stuff within that, but there was also a lot of it had pretty heavy accent, right? And so I'm curious, when you talk about, and I don't mean to like hang it on those three categories of clients, but talk about where you feel like maybe you did add scar tissue to the perceptions of non-believers or rigidity for believers in what you had done before. Where had you contributed to the problem?
Yeah, as I look back, it's like, how do you always try to paint your side of the story very persuasively and feature things and people that help tell your story. But sometimes it's what you leave out of the story that that causes concern, right? When you don't have diversity in your story, when you make people feel like, the like, for example, on the issue of pro-life, for example, if you make people feel who have chosen not to be pro-life in their decision making to be evil and bad people, not that my work actually did that, but if that's how they felt, um, like they were judged and they should be treated as outcasts as a result, or they just don't fit on the Christian team because of their choices. Did I do enough to say not everybody makes the right choices, right?
Mhm.
And we all make mistakes, or did I overly paint the picture that this was the only and the right choice, and anybody that um, disagreed with that was essentially um, wrong?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but, you know, it's like even fighting for traditional marriage, for example, as a perspective, and being able, did I make people feel who don't agree with that? Did I make them feel like I'm better and they're not? They're not, And so, did I create divides, and did I forget to kind of emphasize that we all make bad choices? We're all broken. We all have a need for a savior. We all require redemption. We all have something that we need to bring to Jesus. Nobody is perfect, right? And, so I have to, even in my own work, but as I see the body of work from Christianity, have we done enough, to say, to let everybody know that Jesus does welcome everybody to the table? The first commercial that we did for He Gets Us was basically the idea that Jesus would welcome everybody to the table,
Yep.
right? He wouldn't exclude anybody.
Back to your trademark issue. So he managed those topics in ways that were far less dismissive and a tough love. Sorry, you're on the outside. When we run out of mercy or we run out of patience, or we've got somebody, watching the Planned Parenthood van at the DNC right now.
Right.
It's a really intriguing, if abortion is a "you go girl" gesture, that's an aggressive statement. That's at people who have been pro-life. I mean, I don't think anybody starts off thinking, it'd be really great would be to go terminate a pregnancy today. Like that's not. I don't think anybody's thinking that's a good time.
Right.
Um, but and it's weird how much less deftly Christian or Christianity has managed that than it seems Jesus does.
Yeah,
And
Jesus,
that's what you
as through this process, and we actually had an opportunity to present the work to a lot of leading pastors, for example, before we went to market. We felt that was an obligation that we had. And even when we presented it to the pastors, we actually told them, we're not looking for your endorsement. All we're looking for is to inform you that we're coming out with this campaign, and that, we just don't want you surprised by it. And one of the leading pastors in particular you know, reminded me, that our storytelling was was very similar to Jesus's type of storytelling, in that, he approached people on an individual basis, right? And he said, if you look at how he treated people, he was very tender on the people who didn't see the world the way he saw it or believed the same things that he believed, right? Very tender on the non-believer, right?
Yep.
The people he was tough on were actually religious hypocrites. And when you see, in one way to kind of sum up, I think, some of the problem that we've had as a faith in this country and being persuasive is we do the opposite. We let the religious hypocrites off the line, and we're not so tough on them, and we kind of overlook some of the things that they do, because they're talented or gifted or whatever, and they
Yep.
fall like crazy, but you know it doesn't seem like that Christians treat those falls. It's just like, oh, that person just broken. They need redemption. They need our love. They need our help, right? But we don't do that to the people that we disagree with. In reality, we're actually tender on hypocrites and tough on people who don't agree with us. I think that's it's very interesting, because in all the research that we've done, I didn't come into this believing this, but now I do, is that the whole idea of the non-believer or the skeptic of Christianity, all they really want Christians to do is to walk their walk. And they tell us in research all the time, it's like, if Christians actually behaved and acted like Jesus, we'd have a pretty tough time with them, because
Yeah.
that would be good. But they don't. And so as a result, we're skeptical that Christianity can transform anybody, because it isn't transforming the people who are the most ardent believers.
Are you comfortable sharing the Portland story to illustrate that?
Which story was that one?
There was the mayor in Portland. My recollection is that, I guess we'll edit it out if not, right? That there was a group of Christians who offered help to the mayor of Portland, who at first was resistant. We pick it up from there then, because I think this is what you're illustrating.
Yeah, the Portland, there's a story that we learned along the way. It was actually from a leader of a major Christian organization in a challenging community, like Portland. As you can imagine, there's certain communities in America that are more challenging to be a Christian than others, and Portland is definitely one of them. It's got a lot more skeptics than it does probably Christians. But this organization in particular was working. There were issues going on in Portland where Portland was erupting, and there were fires downtown, and people were fighting, and it was during a lot of racial division, and there were a lot of people that were really upset, and Portland was just kind of like in flames, literally, over some of these tough issues. Well, this Christian group said to the mayor of Portland, it's like, we want to help. We want to step in and help. We've got an army of people that are willing to help you. So, Mayor, if you're interested, and you need us, just let us know. And we want you to know that the Christian community wants to step forward and help. The mayor, because his beliefs, or he believed that he didn't have a lot in common with the Christian community, because he himself was in a same-sex relationship and really didn't feel accepted by Christians, said, no, man, you're like the last people I want to have involved in this. You're part of the problem, and this is just going to get inflamed even more. Well, they just kept growing and growing, the problems in Portland, and it was just getting so out of control that the group reached out again and said, Mayor, we've got thousands upon thousands of people that will just listen to you and do whatever you want. Politics is not going to be into this. Our faith is, we don't have to get into faith discussions and stuff like that. We just see our community falling apart, and we want to step in with love and help any way we can. And the mayor said, you know what, I'm so desperate for help. And if you've got an army of people to help me, and they're willing to listen to me to kind of resolve things. He said, I'll take you up on it. But he says, man, if you start pushing your religion, if you start acting differently than what we need, I'm going to have to cut you guys out. But what happened was they did exactly what he wanted. They brought love to that community. They helped wherever they possibly could. And the mayor then, at the end, as things started to come together, he had completely embraced the Christian community. And he said, you know what? I feel like I was wrong. I judged them just like I think they judge me. And, as we've worked through things together, the Christian community has been right at my side, and they have been helping tremendously. And they're not letting politics get in the way. They're not letting differences get in the way. They're just getting in and helping me love this community and bring it back to some sense of unity, right? And,
Yep.
and then he said, as I started working with him, what I realized is, like, we agree on like 95% of things. We have like this little small percentage of things that we don't maybe see the same way. What I realized is they're not really going to judge me for that, and I'm not really going to judge them for that. It's okay, because you know what? We agree on far more than we disagree. And he said, I just have to say that my perspective has been changed about the Christian community in Portland. And I look at that as an example and say, what if every community in the country could actually experience that and feel that from their Christian community, where without judgment, it's just getting in and helping and loving people and showing people the love that Christ taught us. Christ taught us to first help the person, speak to their condition, understand where they're at, understand where they're coming from, help them out of that, but do so through kindness, through love, right? And being really gentle with these people, not argumentative and judgmental, right? And so that example is, as I see, he gets us, puts out a great message of, really trying to teach people who Jesus really is, right? And what did he really stand for? And what did he really say when he walked the earth, right? And people are, as we started to test this, everybody claims to know a lot about Jesus, but we found out that, everybody knows Jesus, right? So the awareness is a mile wide. The problem is their depth of understanding of Jesus is like an inch deep, right? And you start telling people who are skeptical of Jesus that he stood up for outcasts, he stood up for the marginalized, he helped the people who are disabled and were poor and were in need. That was his focus. His ministry was bankrolled by women. He treated women equally. He thought everybody deserved freedom and respect and dignity, regardless of whether they agreed with him or not in his perspective on, God or not, right? And so when you start telling people that Jesus was actually for everyone, and that he actually stood up for a lot of things that people in America feel as really important, like freedom and equality and dignity, right? That he was talking about these things 2,000 years ago when times were even more different than they are now. Suddenly, when people start hearing that, their respect starts going up, and his message becomes more and more relevant. And we believed, as we've done our research and our homework, is that's the first bridge you got to get people over, is they have to actually respect Jesus, and they have to see what he taught and what he said as relevant to their life today. And once you get them over that bridge, that suddenly starts to open their hearts to, Christians and Christianity, minimally are just not bad people. You hear it from that mayor, right, in Portland, who said, we agree on 95% of things. Why are we fighting each other? Because it's just crazy that we are.
Well, so the Emperor Julian persecuted the Christians because the Christians were taking care of everybody and nobody was using his welfare system. And that kind of put a layer of ice under his power pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of what I love how service could be highly subversive if the people who are in power are trying to leverage power in a way that creates dependence among the people. the mayor of Portland, part of what makes it work is he clearly wasn't leveraging power. He was trying to accomplish results. And when that's the focus, then you can have allies who are focused on love, right?
Right.
Um, I wonder when people hear you talk about some of these lessons, there is I get very frustrated when people go ecumenical in the way that says, oh, our differences don't matter, they're not well considered or whatever, and that becomes just a mushy kind of tribalism. As a it just mushes the edges. I wonder if I want to make sure, like, it seems like ecumenical mush comes because people are still clinging to power and power structures as opposed to laying those down for the sake of service and love. And I wonder to what extent you see Jesus as the solution to tribalism, or Jesus, if the tribes are all round, that he's able to stand in the gaps between those circles somehow and create a different ground of meeting. And how is that different from what you've seen from ecumenical approaches previously? How's that for a long-winded question?
Yeah. No, one of the questions that we asked in our research that scored the highest of any question that we asked in terms of it being compelling and convincing is the question that we asked people, do you know Christians don't own Jesus? He's actually for everybody.
Hmm.
And it scored so high. It's the highest scoring proposition that we tested. Like when we were testing, what could we say to people that would open their hearts and open their minds to, Christianity and the message of Jesus in particular? That question was like mind-boggling for them because they were like, nobody ever described it that way to me. I thought Christians did own Jesus. And it's like, then you could go on to explain that even the early Christians didn't call themselves Christians. They called themselves followers of the way. And actually, Christian is a term that came along later, and it was actually a derogatory name. It was given by the Romans to Christ followers as kind of like, you guys are a bunch of nut jobs, you Christians, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just stuck,
Jesus freaks.
So the reality is, what people think is the Christian tribe, right, is not really, that's not Jesus' intent at all. I mean, he didn't say to the disciples, follow me and become Christians.
What?
He just said, follow me, right?
Yep.
And that's all he asked. Interestingly enough, I'm working on some other projects where, I've been given some perspectives on how deep tribalism really has become within Christianity, or especially, like you hear all the time, like, for example, America's colleges and many colleges around the world, especially in England and stuff like that, the best education institutions, Harvard, Yale, Oxford, for example, all started out as Christian colleges.
The Peter Greer mission drift stuff. Yeah.
They didn't start out as Christian colleges. According to somebody I know that has been investigating this, they started out as denominational colleges. They all were started to perpetuate a specific denomination.
That's a really intriguing difference, isn't it?
Yeah. Like so arguably, there has never been a Christian college in the United States. They all started out as purporting to push forward a certain tribe or denomination of Christianity to recruit people and to train people in those specific beliefs with that specific tribe. And that's why over time, they, quote, stopped becoming a Christian college because all they ever were a denominational tool. And people say, well, today's Harvard and Yale are trying to indoctrinate people into a school of thought. Well, guess what? That's how they started. They started as indoctrinating people into a certain branch of Christianity. And so as you start to really kind of examine tribalism, that could be a very key problem in our approach to Christianity, for hundreds and hundreds of years now, as we keep trying to divide into different camps of Christianity that believe some don't drink, some don't dance, some don't do this, some don't do that. And none of those are rules that are in the Bible. And it's like,
Wow.
so we create our own fiefdoms. And in reality, I think it's very biblical that they eventually fall apart because they're not biblical.
Yeah. Well, and there's an assumption that the only good thing would be the thing that happens at my location. And it's the same idea with business owners, that the only good that can happen is within my business.
Right.
And it's easier to see when it's a business owner because the rest of the world is a marketplace made of competitors. But if your vision is larger than your company, I mean, you can't say that your company belongs to God until the vision for your company is larger than your company. And once that happens, then call it a parish mindset that says anything within a certain geography that is good that happens is a win for us, and we call it good as well. And can we contribute to good things within this space? And then the space can get bigger. And it seems like that would be one antidote to tribal problems. I guess I'm wanting to use that as a transition into do more good, because do more good is a posture and an approach, and it feels like there's a lot of solution in there, but it's born from being able to look at things with a steady eye, and to have something closer to a parish mindset. You're in service to a vision more than service to an operation. But this is your baby, so you tell me about it.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called Do More Good, and its intended purpose originally was really to take my expertise in communications and how it had been used to build a nation of consumers rather than a nation of citizens, right? And how can I kind of take what the consumer market does so well and repurpose it for organizations that are doing good, including many faith-based organizations, and say, how can their voice be as powerful and compete, especially in the media world? And, a lot of Christian organizations in particular have avoided media, believing that it was evil, and I've had to educate them and saying, hey, the early disciples used roads built by Romans. Roads are neither bad or good. They're just a tool. And so stop thinking about media just because we see so much garbage on it as bad or good. It's just a tool. Bad happens to be using it for bad things, and they happen to be very effective at it. Maybe maybe because it has such a grip on our culture. We are a screen-based culture. I think every person has like a minimum of 5 screens that they're constantly looking at. And the one that they're looking at the most is this one. And so, we can't deny that these are the Roman roads. Media is how things get to people. And how are we going to harness that for good? And so I wrote Do More Good as I understand how the consumer world has been able to capitalize on it and actually changed our society and our focus, where we're all about, getting stuff and attaining stuff. And we have forgot about helping each other and really what is our greater purpose as people, and especially as God's people. And so as I look at Do More Good, what I've learned though, well, I effectively have used it as a teaching tool to help many nonprofit and faith-based organizations, help them gain the support and attention that they deserve, and take it away from Taco Bell and McDonald's and Nike and Apple and stuff like that, because that's really who we're competing with today. Churches aren't competing with other churches. We're competing against, a mass market world that, for all intents and purposes is winning. Because church just keep declining in size, and the consumer market keeps growing in size, right? And so So while it's been effective as a teaching tool in that aspect, I've realized over time that God has given me something in that vision that is much bigger than that. And I say people are either in one of two camps. They're in the do more camp or they're in the do more good camp. And
Nice. Yep.
society says do more constantly. Do more, do more, do more, do more. God says, no, do more good. Matter of fact, every book I sign and do more good is from Galatians 6:9. Let's not grow tired of doing more good. If we're patient, we'll reap a harvest, right? And that's what
Yep.
God is saying is just do good till you're so tired of doing good, and just trust me that in the good that you do, we are going to reap a harvest, right? And we're going to reap the harvest of more and more people joining us in heaven when that happens. But it will also reap the harvest of just the pure beauty and gift of giving what it really is, and to live outside of ourselves and stand and be for others. That's what Jesus taught us to do. He was a king that didn't come here to be served. He came here to serve. And so that is our calling, is to serve as Christians. And that's how we'll have the impact. When we do more good versus just do more, that's God, right?
So part of what I love, there's a tangy flavor to the idea, because good feels kind of generic. It feels like anybody has access to it. It doesn't feel privileged, special, and therefore we're back to that mush possibility, right? So when you think about good, have you bothered to define good, or is that exactly the point? Is if it resonates with you as good, pursue it, or what do you do with that?
Yeah, what I love about it is I actually I have a credit card, an American Express credit card, and it says William McKendry on it and do more good, right? Has for like 20 years,
Love it.
And I recently went on 2 different vacations with my 2 different sons. I just wanted to spend a few days with each of them. And so I happened to use that credit card a lot when we were together. And they started to see what I've been seeing for a really long time is, you know, even a guy at a fishing lure store in Coney, Wyoming, you know, he takes my card and he looks at it and he looks at me, he looks at it and looks at me, he goes, I don't know what do more good is, but I like it. I have no idea what his religious belief is. I have no idea of, whether we have anything in common, right? Because I don't even like fishing. So, I was only in a fishing store because
Whoa, we might have to hang up. But yeah. All right.
but but he connected to good, right? And I think people desire to be good. Like even on that same trip, we got back to Michigan. We were going through, leaving the airport parking ramp. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I hand that credit card to the lady who's checking us out, and she does the same thing. She's looking at the credit card, looking at the card. She goes, "Hey, what does Do More Good stand for?" Because I
That's
like
cool.
it, right? And so I think I know we are all wired by God. We are all created by God, and He's put that good heart in every single one of us. And we all know when we're being too selfish. But you know what? In a world that tells you all the time, do more, do more, do more, do more, do more. That's how people will see you as being successful. If you just do more,
Well,
you
part of
get
what I
caught up
also,
in that.
yep, part of what I love in that too is the do more can be refined as you go, but the good can be refined as you go. And I compare that to Google's "don't be evil." Like
Right.
that's negotiating in the exact opposite direction, because then it's well, have I crossed backwards into evil yet? How about now? How about now? How about now? And
And the
you're not
high bar is just to stay above evil. Well, that's
right,
not a very high bar.
right. But and so good, you can step up. You're pointing in. It's You're in a canoe instead of a rowboat. You're facing your destination instead of looking over your shoulder.
Yeah.
And there's something. But what I love too is what a wide tent that casts. So where have you worked with the do more good approach and model with people who were not believers, but had a good definition that was, did you see them shaped by the pursuit of good in a way that maybe they hadn't previously?
Yeah, I just, I mean, people ask me all the time, what if somebody buys my book and they define good as differently than I do, right? And I believe even if they define good as differently than I do, the experience of them doing something good will give them a taste of what good really feels like, and ideally gives them a thirst to chase after what really is good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I see it as practice, even if I don't agree, and even if I see that the good they want to do maybe doesn't necessarily align with a biblical worldview, for example, on something, I still don't see it as a waste of time. It's like they're getting a taste of what it feels like to do good. Again, I think it will allow them to kind of practice. That's practice.
Yeah.
And will also then create a thirst for what really is good, and ideally it leads them to how God defined good, right?
Well, if you or I were sent a postcard, mine would say, it would be a picture of Christine, and yours would have a picture of Lori, and and the phrase on it was "Love her more." Like, got it, and that's never going to get exhausted, even if it starts off with something as clumsy as mowing the yard or whatever the thing is that is the starting
Exactly.
point.
I've argued for a long time that the best Christian tagline is actually Hard Rock Cafe actually owns it, and they define it differently than I would define it. But I remember walking into a Hard Rock Cafe in downtown Chicago because I was at some trade show and needed to get lunch, and we,
Your extra $80 to spend on a burger.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it was actually convenient, to where I happened to be standing. So I walked into a Hard Rock Cafe and got to the reception area before we were sat down, and I saw on the wall, and I guess this is in all Hard Rock Cafes, that's the only one I've ever been in: love all, serve all.
Mm.
They want to serve beer, right? But I just look at that and I go, that may be the best Christian tagline I've ever seen for an organization.
Absolutely.
That spirit of just love all and serve all. That's what we're asked to do. We're not asked to judge all. We're not asked to, decide who we want to serve and who we don't want to serve. Those aren't the things. I mean, when Jesus asks, "Who is your neighbor?" Right? Um, our neighbor is everybody,
Yeah.
right? It's all of creation, and so we are called to love all and serve all, and we're asked not to give up and to keep trying, and that we may actually not experience seeing the benefits of the love that we've poured out there. We're just asked to be seed planters and to be caretakers. We didn't create the seed. We didn't make the seed transform into something, and we didn't create the whole process for how things grow.
It's
We
much harder
only
work.
do something in
Yeah.
between and help where God has asked us to help. Plant the seed, please.
So that takes me back to he gets us, and the idea of the target audience is spiritually open skeptics.
Mm-hmm.
And if we start talking about, so that's produced waves towards the church, but I would say that the tide is flowing out from the
Yeah.
church. There's a decline. So therefore, like the complement would be, if there's another campaign, it would almost be like you would need to target under-inspired believers,
Yeah.
but also really, really reduce, like what you just described with love all serve all. That's really light work. I mean, it's the flip side. If we did the Google version, the don't be evil, Christians could do well to start with don't be an asshole, and the positive version of that would be love all serve all. Talk to me about what your vision is for what would be the complement, or what's missing, or what would be the Paul Harvey rest of the story on this.
Yeah. The what has happened to Christianity in the downward spiral continues, yet 63% of Americans claim to be Christian, right? So it's still the majority of this country. It's dropping fast. Like 10 years ago, it was 70%, and 20 years ago, it was 80%, and I would argue, like, 30 years ago, it was like a 90% of people said that they were Christians, right?
Right.
I would actually, while people would say, look at the drop, I would actually argue, I think there were a lot of people who called themselves Christians that were not Christians. It was just not positive not to call yourself a Christian, because
Yeah, Billy Graham said that he thought 10% of churchgoers were actually Christians. Yeah.
yeah. And because I look at, like the neighborhood I grew up in and stuff like that, there were a lot of people that said they were Christians, but I actually experience more Christianity today than I did 30 years ago, because the Christians who are Christians today seem to be burning a lot hotter than the Christians I knew, that even went to church every Sunday, right?
Yep.
It's just like there seems to be a broader understanding of what our real calling is, and we're doing things because we're odd to do them, not because we ought to do them, right? So I actually believe Christianity is in better shape today than it was 30 years ago, even though the numbers don't suggest that, right?
Because you have to do it on purpose today.
Yeah. However, I think so in our research, we are definitely targeting spiritually open skeptics with the He Gets Us campaign, which is about 24% of America. And that's people who still believe that there's a higher power. They're just not sure it's housed within Christianity, right?
Well, and they kind of disregarded Jesus as one of the possible paths, because I've met Christians and
They
therefore
haven't ruled out Jesus either, right? But they
Right.
haven't been convinced that he's the answer.
Okay.
Even though, like, when you ask people, is Jesus a worthy example to follow? 85% of this country says yes.
Sure.
When you ask people, would this world be better if more people acted like Jesus, it goes like 92% of this country says yes. So there's still this general respect for Jesus and how he lived and how he approached life that people still agree with, right? And, interestingly enough, among young people, they are more skeptical of atheists than they are of Christians, because they go, how can you just like discount there is no God, right? Which is actually a rising statistic, that people are actually more skeptical of atheists today than they used to be, right?
And it's the therefore part that gets really expensive, though, isn't it? It's so who is he and what do I do about it? Yeah.
But the flip side of it, though, is there's a lot of dissatisfied Christians. As a matter of fact, another group that we are kind of targeting with He Gets Us, not as much as a spiritually open skeptic, but as what we call cultural Christians, people who grew up in the church, grew up with the traditions of the church, used to attend church all the time, and especially because of COVID, they've gotten away from attending church on a regular basis. They don't even come on Christmas and Easter anymore, right? But they still, for whatever reason, label themselves and self-identify as a Christian because they still believe in Jesus, right? And sometimes they don't even believe in his divinity, but they still believe in that Jesus walked the earth and he did good things, right?
Yep.
It's interesting, as we've done our research over time, that the people who are the most skeptical of the Christian church are those people, cultural Christians. We were shocked to find out that while we labeled this group as spiritually open skeptics, the people who are very skeptical of the Christian church are actually cultural Christians who may actually still attend, who do still self-identify as a Christian in polls and stuff like that, because they feel burned or something happened to them in their experience with the church where they just no longer believe in the church, right?
Or there's one foot on the dock, one foot on the boat. I mean, I can imagine there's a burden of straddling that they feel pretty keen.
Yeah, they need to do. They're hedging their bet. right?
Yeah.
And we're the spiritually open skeptic. While we've labeled them skeptical, and they are skeptical of Christians and Christianity. But interestingly enough, you ask a spiritually open skeptic, you ask them, so Christians and the church, you're skeptical of them. Yeah, very skeptical. They don't walk their walk at all, right? But then you ask them, do you have any friends that are Christians? And they go, yeah. And you go, what do you think of them? And they go, oh, they're some of the best people I know. So their skepticism is more on the institution than it is on the individual, right?
Yeah.
And so that kind of leads us to, well, what can Christianity do then? We need to start acting individually. We got to stop relying on the institution, right?
Right.
But the institution is important. I mean, I talk to Christians today who have forgotten the church is Jesus's bride, and you
And
can't.
until he divorces her, you better not.
Yeah,
Right.
you can't like him and not like her, right? And it's like they're a couple, and they're a power couple, and he's coming home to her first, and she's supposed to be getting the children ready, which is us, for him to come home, right? And so
She could use some counseling though. But yeah.
yeah. So, but there's a lot of Christians that don't know that. I mean, I can't believe how many pretty devout Christian people I go, yeah, but Jesus said the church was his bride. He did? Or, oh yeah, that's right. I mean, it's like, where did you forget that? So the institution is important. It's just what we've made the institution be is a building that people go to versus a community where we're sent out from. And so what we need to do, and this is where I've kind of shifted my focus and say, well, he gets us as doing a great job of creating, interest in Jesus, right? And interest in exploring Jesus. As a matter of fact, the key performance indicators that we're measuring have everything to do with, do you really understand, Jesus's message that he loves you, right? And that he loves everybody, and that he's a worthy example to follow. He tried to give us an example to follow. That's why he walked the earth, right? So we could see it personally, right? But that, that hopefully based on the He Gets Us campaign, you're more interested in learning about him. And we are finding that people are, and they're growing in huge numbers. Matter of fact, Google search trends over the last 2 years, when we've done Super Bowl ads, the first Super Bowl ad that we ran, we got a call from Google because we spent a lot of money with Google. And they said, dudes, man, in the whole history of Google, Jesus is actually a highly searched term. But we know twice a year, Easter and Christmas, there's going to be these peaks. And we actually prepare Google for those peaks because we kind of know what people are looking for when they type in Jesus into the Google search term. So we know during Christmas and Easter, they're looking for some explanation of the Easter and the Christmas story. So we make sure that is served up to people, right? And they said, but in the whole history of Google, that's never changed, except for 2 years ago on Super Bowl Sunday, more people searched for Jesus than on Christmas, and we tied Easter.
So you beat Santa's butt.
Yeah. But then this last Super Bowl, so our second Super Bowl, we actually beat them both significantly, right? So we already, through He Gets Us, we already have more people searching for Jesus than every other effort combined the rest of the year on Super Bowl Sunday. So it does tell you the power of media, right? But then what if people go to church as a result of He Gets Us? Or what if people are looking for that spirit that they're hearing about in the ads of how everybody shouldn't be judged and how everybody should feel welcomed and how everybody should feel loved? What if they're not feeling that in their community? And what if all they're seeing in their community is tribalism among churches and not Christians actually being seen as a force for good in a community? And so the next step that we really need to do in this whole puzzle of how we're going to help change, how did the world's greatest love story become known as a hate group? How are we really going to change things in America? We're doing our job in bringing people to Jesus that don't know him, but we got to bring the church back to being the church that Jesus defined.
Yep.
And that was a community of believers. It has nothing to do with being a building. Even though buildings are okay, I mean, you need places to meet. There's no question about it. but we need to be sent out into communities as we've been asked to do biblically to do. We need to serve our communities. I discovered I didn't know this, number one, that the word church actually does not mean a building. It actually means a community, a body of believers, right? But then I also learned that the word parish also does not mean a building. It actually is a measurement around a church, and a very specific measurement around a church that church community is responsible for. It's almost like this is your township. You're the church of this township. You're responsible for everybody in that township, not just the people who come to church, right? And so when you really look at how church should be defined, we have completely redefined it for our own purposes. And again, church has become about do more, not do more good.
Yep.
They become vehicles to consume the gospel, not to live the gospel. And so we've got to change that. So what do we have to do? We have to educate Christians. We have to re-educate Christians and say, hey, we're doing it wrong. Time out, man. We got to start doing things. And guess what? Let's do these things. Let's do these good things that the Bible tells us to do. Because you know what? In Galatians 6:9, it tells us if we do these things and we do more good, if we're patient and we're smart, the harvest is going to be amazing.
Yeah. So that's another moment where we get to the mush. Like that is, we don't need specific programs and efforts on that, do we? It's more about setting a heart posture, and then just however you walk around with that filter on the world, do that thing. Is that what you're saying? Is that?
Yeah. But
so is it a matter of Christian engagement levels? Like, do Christians tend to bifurcate their Sunday from the rest of the week, or have they been taught a shell-shocked kind of bunker mentality? Why don't we walk around with a bias towards doing more good?
Because we've been taught that our salvation is the most important thing. We're not really taught that. No, the most important thing is that we quickly accept Christ, get our salvation out of the way, and get to the business of leading more people to Christ, right? And how do we do that? We make them feel loved. We make them welcomed in our community. We're hospitable. We treat everybody as our neighbor. We show them such remarkable hospitality and love that it confounds them, right? I mean, that's one of the words that we ended up, as we were doing Creative for He Gets Us, we said, what is it that we want to do with every ad and every piece of communications that we do for He Gets Us? We said we want to confound people, because that's what Jesus did. He didn't do what people expected. He didn't say what people expected, right? He always was like 3 steps ahead of everybody, and was willing to say, no, this is what you should do, right? Everybody's got a stone in their hand. Hey, instead of telling everybody, you idiots, drop the stones, you sinners, he didn't say that. He just said, hey, everybody who hasn't sinned, go ahead, chuck the first stone. Well, couldn't do it, right?
So that's another one of those instances where he solves it in ways that are way more deft than an organizational solution would be.
Right.
That said, I have a question that is, I think it's going to turn out to be, it's a people group kind of focus for me. So I look at kings and priests. I think in terms of, in particular, it's business leaders, or I call them the centurions.
Yep.
And I also then see the priests, who tend to be the pastors and ministry leaders and stuff like that. And it seems as though the priests have driven the kings out. But the priests then, once the kings have left, the priests are still there, and they suffer and they pour out and they bleed and they dry up, and that what ends up happening is a whole bunch of leverage from disempowered places, we'll call it that. And so, for as tedious and frustrating as I often think of the priests as being, my bone to pick is with the kings who allow themselves to leave, who then abdicate. and I want to see the kings return as allies for the priests. I think the role of the king is to build the garden wall, expand the grounds of it, and the priest is the one who lives within it, tends life within it. The priests have no inheritance. The kings have the inheritance. The kings have the burden. When a king dies, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, or he did what was wicked in the eyes of the Lord. You don't have that summary for a
Yeah,
priest.
but is it a chicken or egg thing? Is, have the priests said to the kings, victory is your salvation. Victory is you getting involved in church things at the church. And do those two things, we'll call it good. And the kings are like,
Yeah,
that
every
doesn't,
client I have is
that,
frustrated.
that just feels like do more. That feels
Yep,
like, that doesn't feel any different than the market out there. It's like, the
yep,
Y wants me to do the same thing, or,
yep.
the Moose Club wants me to do the same thing. How is the church different than all the other places I could invest my time and energy, right?
Yep.
And
And
if
make
I'm
you
already
better.
saved, and I guess I don't need to stick around. Victory's already won, right? I'm gonna go do something else, right? They have it. So who's more responsible? I think they're both responsible. I think it's up to the kings to actually get to know the Bible more and understand what the Bible is saying, right? And understand that your own salvation is not the only victory to be won here. You're supposed to be in with God, creating many, many more victories, right? And it's not just within your church; it's within your entire sphere of influence, right? And so, um, so yeah, I can point the finger at kings and say, you guys should be smarter. But man, I hear every church I go to, it's like you're a sinner, you need to repent. And once you admit you're a sinner and repent and accept Jesus into your heart, it seems like the only victory they're striving for too. So it's like they're both guilty, and as a result, they've driven us down this hole that doesn't even resemble the church that you read about in, like, for example, in the book of Acts, which is complete sacrificial giving till it
Yep.
hurts, right?
Well, it seems like what has died along the way is the church, or what's suffered has been the church. So I have clients who the results they see in their businesses are remarkable. I saw a guy from Coca-Cola Consolidated speak, and one of the metrics they track is dedications to Jesus. They're averaging 150 a month of employees who, because of the environment they're in, think Jesus is pretty cool. Well, that's a pretty darn effective workplace result. And the amount of hours you have to have that impact are way greater because, you know, you engage us when you want to. It seems to me that it would be better to get priests into the workplace than to get the workplace to go to church on Sunday, and that there should be a flywheel that comes. But the role of the church seems like it has become more and more off to the side as this dysfunction has happened. I'm curious, is that the sort of thing that a campaign should try to address, or what? How would you take that dynamic and put a "he gets us" style frame or a "do more good" recipe to address that the institutional dysfunction?
Yeah, I think it starts with you know leadership and content.
Okay.
First, it really does. You got to one of the brands that I really respect, what they've been able to do in the consumer market is Nike. I mean, just do it arguably is probably the best known tagline.
Yep.
And they're a massive company, and their whole go to market strategy is actually very biblical. And their whole go to market strategy is we have to be, then we have to do, and then we can say.
Hmm.
And so they said, no matter what we decide to do, whether what sport we're going to be involved in, or whatever initiative we're going to be a part of, we have to first learn how to be that, be in that sport, be in that situation. We have to experience it ourselves, right? And then we become transformed as a result of that. And then we have to move to doing that and spreading that around and learning to coach and learning to, win together with other people. So you be as an individual, you do as a group, and then now you have the license to talk about it.
So that's a parallel to, I've been doing studies lately on tithes and stuff, and there are the three tithes. So the first is for the priests, and that's whose you are. Then there's the tithe for the festivals, and that's who you are as a people. And then the third is for widows, orphans, foreigners, and priests again, and that's who you are to the world. It's the same recipe.
Right.
But when God reinstitutes the tithe over and over, it feels like what he is reinstituting over and over is, here's the recipe for you to have a whole, rewarding, and meaningful identity that goes from that first place where it's whispered by the Lord. Or so, a soldier who's convinced he's going to die will cry out for God and his mom,
Right.
because those are the first two voices who spoke any sense of self into him. And then the family allows you to try out who you are. And then when you go launch into the world to do a thing, if it fails, you come back to your family and you come back to that orienting voice. It seems like there are structures that help us do those, the be, do, say recipe.
Right. So we have to learn to be the church of Acts, right? We have to get back to being the church that the Bible outlines, right? And then we have to practice doing that, right, in our communities, and doing it get across tribal lines and do it with other Christians in our communities and having an impact, right? And then we have to have a rallying cry that gets around that, because people love rallying cries, right? And they love messages, right? And, it's why Just Do It has been as effective as it has, right? So it needs to be packaged in such a way that people now feel like they're a part of the community, but also it can be identified by people outside the community. It's like, well, this church and this Christian and this Christian, they're all doing all this good in our community. And they're actually getting out, and they're not just like hiding in their church and talking about how the world outside of that church is bad, right?
Yep.
And and now the outside world starts to see, hey, you know what? These Christians are acting in unity, actually, as if they all believe the same thing. Like, Jesus is our Lord and Savior, and he modeled us to serve, not to be served. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to love our neighbors as Jesus asked us to love our neighbors, right? And we're going to, yes, there's a time for Sunday worship, and there's a time for a community of believers to kind of support each other and hear each other out and stuff like that. And that's great that that's a Sunday or maybe a Wednesday night small group and stuff like that. But that's not the end of our faith. That's actually just a support system for what our faith is supposed to be doing, right? And so, I do see kind of what, interesting enough, like, we gave away just an unbelievable amount of T-shirts and hats and stuff like that for He Gets Us. And we originally designed all the hats and T-shirts thinking spiritually open skeptics, since they were free and they were cool, would actually get these T-shirts and hats. And we gave away millions of dollars worth of merchandise, all in exchange for, like, if you asked for a T-shirt, you had to promise to do something good, right? And people loved it. It's like, I don't have to pay anything, and He Gets Us another thing that people could talk about. Go like, man, these guys are crazy. They're giving away this merch for free, and you only have to do is like be nice to somebody. Okay. Right. So, but as we gave that stuff away, we started following up on who's actually getting this stuff and what are they doing with it. We found out that it was mostly Christians that were getting the T-shirts and the hats. And the T-shirts all had like provocative messages on them, like Jesus let his hair down too, or Jesus was a refugee, that kind of stuff, and, again, thinking that it would appeal to skeptics. But as we found out, no, it was actually Christians that were getting this stuff and they were wearing it. And we asked them, why? They go, well, number one, we thought it was cool, and so cool enough to wear, like there's not a lot of Christian merch that I'm willing to wear. It's all stupid, but this stuff is cool. Yeah. And I go, all right. So beyond being cool, why else did you order it and get it? Well, when I wear it, I get more people asking me about Jesus than at any time in my life. It opens up conversations. And it's like, so this
Mm-hmm.
campaign, this other campaign has to have that rallying cry, not just to rally Christians together, but to create curiosity among observing people to say, well, you're all wearing this and saying this. That's interesting. I've never seen the Catholics and the Baptists and the Methodists all work together on something.
Right.
This is crazy. Okay, that's what needs to happen.
Well, that dynamic, going back to the Nike thing, puts me at the gym, and I've had more than a couple of experiences with weight loss and body image and all that sort of thing. But the safest place I ever feel is at the gym, because no matter what you think about my current state, where do you want me to be but here? And it's the most likely place for me to get an attaboy or keep going or something like that. And I don't think that carries over to my experience about being at church or being in a Christian community. And that's too bad, because
It's more
the
about
B part,
what you do wrong. What are you not doing? What do you,
yeah. But what an easy thing to teach. So the be do say recipe is like, it's so obvious to say, good job being here, keep going, when it's at the gym. It can't be that hard to feed that same sort of sentiment in the church.
It isn't, and we're seeing it with He Gets Us. I mean, when you see those Google search trends and stuff like that, you realize that, when you put money into the marketplace, when you compete in the marketplace, like the market is demanding that you compete, where your messages have to be powerful, they have to be well told, and they have to be smart. You don't have to outspend the competition, but we do have to outsmart them, and which requires that you gather insights, that you really understand your audience, that you say, is there something I can do differently in order to be more effective? And then you have to figure out a way to communicate that in the marketplace, and then you do it frequently enough where it has power and momentum, and then you reinforce, to the people who sign up and follow, let's keep this going, and let's continue to make this better and better, right? It's a continuous improvement process, right? And as you look at the pattern of communications by Jesus in the Bible, that's what He showed us. He approached people, He got to know them. He wanted to understand their story, or at least tell them that He understood their story of where they're at. And then He didn't preach to them and give them a laundry list of things that He wanted them to do. He told them a story or a parable, and the storytelling that He used led them to a conclusion that didn't always necessarily have a direct answer, but they followed the story where they could, in themselves, they could internalize, I know what you're trying to say to me. I get it, right? And so they learned it because He forced them to come up with the answer themselves and what it meant for them in their life. But the story also was relevant to them. If they were fishermen, He would tell them fishing stories. If they were construction workers, He would tell them building stories, right? He also knew how to tailor to who they were, right? But then He motivated them by saying, I love you. I would appreciate you moving with me down this better road. And, He, like those people in the gym, they're saying, I don't care what shape you're in. I know what you're trying to do. I'm with you on this journey too, and I'm gonna love you and give you some love to move you forward, right? All the things that Jesus showed us on how to communicate with people, we don't follow. We try to moralize people and demoralize people before we show them that we love them and that we're willing to help and that we understand them. And no matter what shape they're in today, we understand that we're not in the best shape either. And guess what? We're all moving forward with this goal in mind of making ourselves healthier and better, right? And so your gym example is a perfect example of how the church community should actually be responding to people that they come in contact with.
Well, I wonder too so when you talked about the general market and having to outsmart them, obviously there are going to be examples of unsmart, just careless throwing spaghetti against the wall, just using force to market. You're just going to make noise, and that's you can outsmart that. I wonder if there is a different layer when you talk about, if we start thinking parish and you start thinking about the lessons and the blessings of do more good. This has to package up to other brands as well. And I wonder, is it as simple as articulating a compelling vision that aligns people? Is that what it comes down to? Is that if you're a brand that doesn't cast a compelling vision, you're not a smart brand, and you have to brute force it? Or how else would you say that?
Yeah, it has to be simple. It has to be clear. I mean, I remember when we gave the original brief out for, all the creative people to be thinking about, he gets us, I told him my goal in this campaign is we create a tagline or a name or whatever that's 3 words or less. I mean, because, Nike has Just Do It, Apple has Think Different, and Harley Davidson got it down to 1 word, freedom, right? And so we know that's how you cut through things, is get it down to a simple idea that people they're motivated by it, they're compelled by it, right? And I was told by a pastor, when he first heard He Gets Us, he goes, everybody's heard Jesus loves you. He Gets Us still says Jesus loves you, but he loves you so much that he knows you and he gets you and he's okay with you, right? He actually really likes you, you know? And, it's probably women that understand this more than probably men, but I mean, it's like women will tell you they like a guy because they get them, right?
Yep.
It isn't that they're just attracted to him. It's like they get them emotionally. And so the words He Gets Us have been very powerful because they're very sync and they're a vision that people can go, I want to be with that Jesus because he gets me, right? And he gets what I'm struggling with and where I'm at, and I can actually move forward with somebody that gets me, right? Not somebody that judges me. And so the church needs the same thing. They need some kind of compelling, 3-word or less vision.
Yeah, we should come up with one that's only 2. That'll be a win.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But it's just got to be a handle that people go, I'm a part of this. And eventually people come to understand what that means. Like, when Apple said think different, it's like, you make computers. No, we make computers for people who change the world, who change industries, who come up with crazy ideas, right? Our computer is just a tool for people like that. That's why cool people and crazy people, at first it was all just like creative people, but now it's everybody uses Apple products because why? Because Apple products are cool and it helps them achieve what they want to achieve. Well, how does the church do that for your faith? How is the church and its community a tool to help you accomplish ultimately what the good that you want to do? Because the good that you want to do probably can't be done alone. That there's going to be greater impact in us all working together and become and being a force for good, rather than just me being an individual force for good. Not that that's not any good, but guess what? If you're part of something bigger, you're going to accomplish things that are bigger.
Around that line, and then the partnerships as well.
I do have to stop at 12:40 or 2:45 hard.
Okay. Well, that's the last question anyway. So good. I'm curious, what does it cost and what does it seem for the people who carry the flag for stuff like this? So I know there was one family that was really prominent within He Gets Us, but it seems like all movements, you have to have a champion. What's it like for you when you meet with a person? Do they have to come to you with the idea or do you take the idea to them? In the end, what they're signing on for isn't just the money expense. It's a social expense. There is a spiritual resistance that comes with it, and it is the burden of a mantle that they have to step into. What have you seen with that?
Yeah, the thing that frustrates me the most is I deal with, I've dealt with a lot of big brands and a lot of big spenders in marketing, right? And on the business side of the things that I've been involved in is without hesitation that they know if you want to win, you got to go all in, right? I mean, you got to put in the work, you got to put in the investment, you got to have like faith that your idea is going to win. You're going to have to get people around that in order to win. You're going to have to motivate people. You're going to have to attract people. You're going to have to grow this thing. You have to be methodical. I mean, it is like in business, you know how things get done, right? And people don't hesitate about investing, especially investing financial resources to win. It seems like especially within the Christian world, there's a resistance to that. There's a resistance to what it's going to take to win. And what it's going to take to win is if you want to compete in this world, we got to get in where this world is being influenced, right? I mean, Jesus and the disciples went to people. They went to places where people were at, right? They used the roads, they used the facilities built by others, but they went into those places, right?
Yep.
We need to go into those places, and Jesus's ministry was bankrolled primarily by women, but it was bankrolled. And I'm sure those investments by those women were not easy investments. I mean, they, were giving up, perfumes, for example, that were worth a year's worth of wages, right? I mean, they were making sacrifices to make it happen. And see, the greatest frustration for me is, why is Christianity not as serious about winning as business is about winning? And if we're in God's business, what is holding us back from believing that to be true? I've had questions about he gets his budget. It's, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? But then I go, hey, there's a guy in my community that, started playing football in high school. He went on to be a college quarterback. He went on to be a pro quarterback, and he just signed a $180 million contract with the Atlanta Falcons. He's one player on a 53-man roster for the Atlanta Falcons, and he signed $180 million, which is actually bigger than the He Gets Us budget, right?
Yep.
And I go, why did the Atlanta Falcons pay him $180 million? Because the Atlanta Falcons are serious about winning. And it's like, why are we questioning? And I hear the criticism a lot from Christians. It's like, why do you have to invest so much money? Shouldn't that go to poor people and stuff like that? No, we're creating an army of people to help poor people. And it takes investments to build an army. And unfortunately, our army is shrinking today.
Yep.
We've got to do something, right? And why are we not as serious and motivated and expecting a return on investment when we make these investments as the business world is, or the Atlanta Falcons are, about winning in their world, right? If we're supposed to be winning people for Christ, I'm sorry, I think Jesus's quarterback budget should be bigger than the Atlanta Falcons.
It's the doing. And yeah, it's weird how passivity is holiness instead of activity is holiness. So
yeah.
All right, well, we're going to hang up so that you can get to your next thing. I'm going to pause it here in just a second. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll be right back with you.